Hi everyone. There's this weird concept in healthcare of when it rains, it pours. In other words, you won't see anybody with a particular condition for like a year, and then all of a sudden 1 week, 5 people come in with that condition. And for me lately, that condition has been hormone imbalances. And there's this general idea out there of like if you test for hormones, let's say like testosterone, let's say, if you're low in testosterone, that must mean that your body isn't producing enough testosterone. So if you just give it testosterone, everything will be great. And unfortunately, that's not the way it works. In fact, it can be very detrimental and long-term effects can happen from that. And it's the same with women with estrogen and progesterone and testosterone in women too. So I just want to sort of like make this quick little video to sort of oversee the whole physiologic process of hormones. So when you look through the physiology of hormones, it starts in the brain in this area called the hypothalamus, which is always measuring the levels of your hormones. And depending on whether they're too high or too low, it will send out releasing hormones to the pituitary, which is also in the brain. And it tells the pituitary to release these hormones called stimulating hormones. And those stimulating hormones will go to the end organ like the adrenal gland or the testes or the ovaries or the thyroid, and it'll tell that endocrine gland to make the specific hormone, right? Once that hormone leaves that endocrine gland, it's immediately bound to a protein. And the reason it does that is because it makes it inactive. So if it didn't do that, as soon as that hormone leaves that endocrine organ, it would have immediate local effects on all the tissues around it. And you don't want that to happen. You want it to be distributed. So the hormone gets bound to a protein, whether it's sex hormone binding globulin or thyroid binding globulin or albumin or some sort of protein. And so now that hormone is bound. And then for reasons nobody really understands, when it gets to a cell, it breaks off that binding protein and it becomes a free hormone, and that free hormone then binds to a receptor site on that cell, and then it tells that cell to do whatever it should. So if it's the thyroid, it'll tell that cell to increase metabolism, or if it's testosterone, it'll tell it to increase its androgenic effects, or whatever the effect is. It's called a proteomic response. So it tells the proteins what to do, basically, right? So once all that happens, you want hormones cleared from the body. So that happens in the liver mostly through something called hepatic biotransformation. So hepatic means liver. Biotransformation is basically the process of taking like a fat-soluble hormone and making it into a water-soluble hormone so it can be excreted in the feces or the urine. And so when that happens, it's changed, it's biotransformed, and then it gets excreted through the gallbladder, and then it goes into the gut. And once it goes into the gut, you have the gut microbiome that also does biotransformation. So you have two different sort of areas where those hormones are biotransformed. And then there's metabolites that happen from that, and there's partially metabolized hormones. Those metabolites and partially metabolized hormones can go back into circulation if you're not clearing them properly. So if we think about this whole process, you have to have a proper working brain that is going to secrete the hormone releasing hormones and the pituitary to secrete the stimulating hormones. And if you're under stress, if you have a lot of inflammation in your body, if you're overtraining, then those parts of the body will not secrete that hormone properly, okay, to tell the endocrine organ what to do. And then you can have a problem with the end organ. So like in menopause, the ovaries just become senescent, which is a term we use for just aging, and they stop working as well as they should, right? Same as like your vision stops working as well as it should, or your skin becomes wrinkled. This is just part of aging, and there's not much we can do about that. But then when it leaves there, right, a lot of people have very low sex hormone binding globulin, which means that that hormone is no longer bound to the protein, so it has like a huge effect where it's overactive in its response, even if you test and the level of that hormone is okay. So then once it happens there, it can go to the receptor site on the cell that we talked about earlier. And there's such thing as endocrine disruptors, which are like BPAs in plastic or formaldehyde that you get in carpets or like fire retardant materials. Those endocrine disruptors look very similar to the endocrine hormones, and they bind to those receptor sites. So now they block the hormone from attaching. So I hope you understand where I'm going with this. If we tested a person like that for their hormones could be totally fine, but they have all these endocrine disruptors that are blocking them from doing their effect, right? Or they could test totally normal for their hormones, but they lack sex hormone binding globulin, so they have like too much of a response. Or they can have too much sex hormone binding globulin, and we test their hormone levels and they're fine, but they're not having an effect because they're so bound up in this protein. Or you can have a problem with your liver that's not biotransforming it. You can have a problem in your gut microbiome. All those things, if they're not properly being metabolized, they go back into circulation and they bind to receptor sites, and they can alter the effect of that cell, even though your hormone levels are okay. So my point is, rather than just like giving someone a hormone, it would be really wise to figure out where along that whole process the breakdown is taking place. But there's problems all along this pathway, and we need to figure out where the problem is taking place before we just arbitrarily give somebody hormones. And the other thing that happens is when you start giving people hormones, those receptor sites on the cells, they get sort of recirculated every few weeks. So if you give someone a bunch of hormone, it's a protective mechanism in the body that those receptor sites downregulate. You produce less of them, or fewer of them, because it's having too much of an effect. So now you give somebody hormones, they're going to feel great for a little while, but then those receptor sites downregulate, and then they start feeling like crap again. And if you take them off that hormone, look out, because now there's going to be a huge rebound effect because their receptor sites have downregulated. So it's a big web, and I don't want people to think that they can just get a hormone test and get on some sort of prescription hormone and everything's going to be rosy. So if you have any questions about this, please let us know. I'd be happy to walk you through this whole process. Thanks.